It's kind of wild how technology changes things, right? Like, one minute we're using it for one thing, and the next it's being used in ways we never even imagined, sometimes good, sometimes not so much.
Yeah.
Today, we're actually diving into something like that, a trend that's honestly pretty unsettling. We're talking about human smuggling using social media.
Social media, really?
Yeah, seriously, like Instagram, TikTok. These platforms are being used to connect people who are desperate to get to the U.S. with smugglers offering a way in.
Wow.
And, everyone's seen the headlines about immigration and the border, but we're going deeper than that today, looking at the actual mechanics, like how it actually works, the human stories and the real dangers. And it's all based on some reporting that VOA Turkish did.
Okay, so how is this all working? I'm having a hard time picturing smugglers and social media together.
Right. So VOA Turkish found all these accounts, mainly on Instagram and TikTok, disguised as like tourism services, but they're offering smuggling packages.
Yeah.
And they're not even being subtle about it.
Right.
Yeah, it's out in the open. Talking about fees, different routes even, like what vaccines you should have for crossing at certain points. It almost sounds legit, which honestly is probably the point, right?
Totally. Building that sense of legitimacy is huge, especially in a situation like this, where trust is a major factor. They know the more above board they've seen, the more likely people are to trust them, which is kind of scary to think about.
It is, and they actively take it a step further by showing off these success stories, almost like those travel vlogs you see, of people who supposedly used their services and are now, living the dream in America.
Oh, wow.
And get this, VOA Turkish actually interviewed one of these people. They call him MK. He was a tow truck operator in Turkey.
Okay.
And he actually made it to the U.S. using a smuggler he found, you guessed it, through TikTok. And the craziest part, he said, it's more reliable than the state.
Wow. That's something. I mean, trusting a smuggler you found on TikTok over, well, everything else, that says a lot. Like, is this more about people not trusting traditional systems anymore? Or is it more that these illicit networks are just that good at what they do?
That's the big question, right? It's like, on the one hand, it makes you think, like, how desperate do you have to be to put your faith in a random person you found on social media?
Right, exactly. For someone like MK, maybe the established systems just seem like too much bureaucracy, too slow, maybe even corrupt. Who knows? But it definitely highlights that lack of trust.
Right. But then on the other hand, you have to think these smugglers are clearly doing something, right? Like you were saying, that legitimacy piece is huge, but then you add in the social proof with the success stories, and it's like they're normalizing something that is incredibly risky.
Definitely. And we can't forget, MK, he didn't just leave for money, which a lot of people do. He wanted a different social environment, which is something you don't hear as much. But again, it all comes back to how these accounts are only presenting one side of the story.
It's all good until it's not, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. These platforms might seem transparent on the surface, but they're presenting a very, very sanitized, almost glamorized version of something that's incredibly dangerous.
So while they're busy showing everyone, look, made it to America, they're conveniently leaving out all the bad stuff, the exploitation, legal problems, even the chance of violence or death, which unfortunately are all real possibilities.
And that's what we need to get into next, because there's a much darker side to this whole digital path to the American dream.
So we've talked about all these promises, but like what really happens? I mean, I can't imagine it's always as easy as they make it seem.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The journey itself is dangerous, really dangerous. And if you're caught, well, let's just say the legal stuff, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, and VOA Turkish has some stories. They're tough to read. People getting scammed, abandoned by their smugglers, even disappearing. It's a good reminder that this is serious business.
Definitely.
One route that seems pretty common is going from Turkey to Mexico, then trying to get across the U.S. border that way. Can you walk us through that? Like, what are the risks there, legally speaking?
Sure. First off, entering the U.S. without authorization. That's a federal crime right there.
Yeah.
And depending on the situation, someone caught doing that, they could be detained, deported, or even face charges. It gets complicated.
So even if nothing bad happens on the journey itself, it can still mess up your life.
Oh, yeah, big time. And think about those who are, like, promised everything, and then they're just left stranded. It's awful.
Happens a lot from what I was reading.
Yeah, and then they're super vulnerable, in a foreign country, no resources, probably don't speak the language. It's a recipe for disaster, honestly.
VOA Turkish actually spoke with this immigration attorney, Tolga Osek, and he was saying that, unfortunately, yeah, people are dying on these journeys. It's easy to forget there are real lives on the line here.
Very true.
That makes you wonder, like, who's responsible for stopping all this? It can't be easy.
It's tricky. There's no one answer because there are so many players, right? I mean,
Yeah.
VOA Turkish mentions a few, starting with the social media companies themselves, obviously.
Makes sense. They're the ones with the accounts, right?
Right.
They're not exactly hidden.
Exactly. There's a lot of pressure on platforms like Instagram and TikTok to control that stuff, get rid of those accounts. But it's tough. It's like they shut one down, another one pops up. Never ending.
So it's a much bigger issue.
Way bigger. Governments have a huge role, too, in the U.S. and places like Mexico. Strengthening border security, going after those smuggling rings, tackling corruption, that kind of stuff.
And we can't forget about Turkey's government in all of this.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
A lot of this starts there, you know? So why are people leaving in the first place? The economy, the political climate, that feeling of hopelessness, those are things that need to be addressed too, or nothing's going to change.
It's like this awful cycle, isn't it? Desperation mixed with this idea of opportunity, even a dangerous one. It's the perfect recipe for smugglers to take advantage. And it's easy to get caught up in how it all works, the logistics. But we have to remember the why. Like, why are people willing to risk so much?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the whole American dream thing comes in.
Yeah.
What does that even mean to people on the outside looking in?
Yeah, the American dream, you hear that a lot, especially when it comes to the U.S., right? And for some of these folks, especially those coming from Turkey, it feels like it's just not possible back home.
Exactly. And the stuff we read in VOA Turkish really hits on that, like all those economic and social things that are making people want to leave Turkey in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The economy is not great, not many opportunities, and a lot of people want more freedom, both politically and socially.
It's really interesting, though, because it's not always just about money, right? I keep going back to MK, that tow-truck driver, and how he specifically mentioned wanting a different kind of social scene, not just a bigger paycheck.
You're right. And that idea of the U.S. being the land of opportunity, the place to start over, build something better, it's a powerful idea. And historically, I mean, the U.S. has had pretty open immigration policy, so that just adds to it.
It does.
But the reality is, achieving that American dream, it's getting harder.
Yeah.
Even for people who do it the legal way.
That's got to be tough to see that gap between what you think it's going to be like and then what it actually is.
Yeah.
And when you actually look at the numbers, it's pretty shocking. VOA Turkish said over 55,000 Turkish citizens have tried to enter the U.S. illegally just in the last 4 years through Mexico or Canada.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
That is. And it's not just the U.S. that's seeing this either. Just in the first half of this year, 28,000 Turkish citizens applied for asylum in the EU. Yeah, it feels like it's part of something bigger, you know. People are desperate, so desperate that they're willing to risk everything.
Just for a chance.
Exactly.
There was this one quote in the article, I haven't been able to shake it. Someone who made it to the U.S. said, "We can no longer dream in Turkey. We can't hope for anything." It's heavy stuff. They feel hopeless. And that's why they take these journeys, because what else is there?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
So as we wrap this up, what are the big takeaways here? What should we be thinking about after hearing all of this?
I think the biggest thing is remembering that these are real people with real lives, right? Every headline, every number, it represents someone making a really, really tough decision. They want something better, that's all.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in all the details, but we can't forget that.
And as much as we've been talking about social media and how dangerous these smuggling networks are, it goes way deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's about fixing the problems that make people want to leave in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
No jobs, no hope, terrible social and political situations.
Right, like getting rid of a few social media accounts isn't going to magically fix everything.
Exactly. It's going to take a lot more than that. Countries working together, less corruption, easier ways to legally move to a new country. And honestly, even that's just scratching the surface.
It's a huge, complex problem.
It really is.
It's about global stability, giving people a chance, a future.
Yeah.
So hopefully what you take away from this is, look past the headlines, right? Understand how complicated this stuff is, but always, always remember the human side of it.
Well said.
That's all the time we have for today, but thanks for listening. We'll be back soon to dive into another topic.